My name is Carol Calder, 33 years old. I was cleaning out my late father's Navy trunk when I found the receipt that changed everything. The trunk that had sat in my garage for years collecting dust while the brass lock went tarnished and stiff like a mouth that no longer wanted to speak. He'd been gone since I was 19, officially missing in action after a deployment no one in my family liked to talk about. And every time I walked past that trunk, I felt the hush of a room that remembers an argument. When I finally worked up the nerve to open it, I told myself I was just sorting through medals and uniforms for donation, a practical act, nothing spiritual about it, but the minute the lid creaked up, the cold of the concrete floor curled into my bones, and the smell of old canvas and machine oil pulled me straight back into the childhood rhythm of his boots in the hallway. I thought I'd find order, because he was a disciplined man who labeled every folder and polished every medal. Yet what I found was one slip from order, a crumpled receipt from a café called the Second Cup. I'd never heard of it. The black ink had bled at the edges the way sweat makes maps. On the back, in a hand I didn't recognize, were 7 words that made my fingers shake. Come back when you're ready to start over. It felt too personal to be random. He didn't do cryptic messages. He did checklists and square it away and right order matters, Carol. And I could hear his voice saying it, even though he used to call me Eve when I was little. A nickname he claimed sounded like the beginning of a story. Start over. With what? With who? I'd served 10 years in the Marine Corps, led a platoon, earned commendations, and then 2 years after discharge, I drifted like a buoy cut free, working part-time at a veterans outreach office telling other people how to rebuild their lives, while my own sat boxed up in the garage. Civilian life was louder than any battlefield. The quiet made me restless. The noise made me anxious. And somewhere between the two, I'd misplaced the person who used to run toward hard things. I turned the receipt over again and imagined my father's rough hands folding it, his thumb pressing the smudge near the corner, and I told myself it couldn't be his writing because his cursive had a sharper slant, but my gut said otherwise. The cafe was across town, a half hour through Phoenix traffic that gleamed like a chain under the sun. I almost didn't go. It felt ridiculous, chasing a ghost over a coffee receipt, but staying home felt worse. The trunk sat open on the floor, metals glinting under the garage light, and that single scrap of paper beat like a small heart I couldn't ignore. The Second Cup was ordinary in the way traps are ordinary, a small shop tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore you'd miss if you blinked. Bells on the door chimed when I stepped in. The air smelled of coffee and something sweet, cinnamon rolls just pulled from the oven, and the hum of the espresso machine sounded like a ship's engine remembered from far away. A woman in her 60s stood behind the counter, gray hair tied back, sleeves rolled, eyes kind but sharp. And when she looked up, she smiled like she'd been expecting a late train to finally arrive. I was wondering when you'd come, she said. The words landed so precisely I forgot how to breathe. Excuse me? She nodded toward the faded receipt in my hand. You're here about something you found in a trunk. My throat tightened. How do you know that? She wiped her hands on a towel with a steady motion, a ring mark pale on her finger where a band used to live. Because that's my handwriting. For a second, the whole place went quiet except for the low hiss of steam. You wrote this? I asked. About 6 years ago, she said, studying me like she was comparing me to a memory. He told me you'd come when you were ready. The floor shifted under me. Who told you? Her name tag read June. She said my father's name gently, like a fragile word. That's not possible, I said. He's dead. June tilted her head. That's what they said. Somewhere behind me, a bell dinged for a finished drink, and all I could think was that I might faint in a coffee shop because a stranger was untying a knot I'd worn for 14 years. What did he tell you? I managed. That you'd lost your way. That someday you'd come looking for him, not in the way people usually do, but through something small, a message, a reminder. She reached under the counter and slid out a weathered wooden box the size of a cigar case. He left this for you, said to give it when the time was right. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside lay a Zippo lighter, silver, scratched, engraved with his initials, cold as a coin in winter. Beneath it, a folded piece of paper. This time the handwriting was unmistakable. Slanted lines I knew from old mission notes and birthday cards. Eve, start over means tell the truth. No signature, no explanation, just that. I sat down at the nearest table because the room seemed to tilt, and June placed a cup of coffee beside me. On the house, she said. He liked it black. I didn't drink it. I just watched the surface darken and cool and turn into a mirror that shook with my breath. Did he come here often? Just once, June said. The day before his last deployment, we talked for hours about you. The last two words hit me harder than I'm willing to admit. About me? She nodded. He said he'd been too hard on you, that Marines and Navy share a uniform color, but not always a language. He wanted you to know he respected you, even when he didn't say it. My father wasn't a man of soft words. He led with orders, not apologies. Hearing that through a stranger felt impossible, and exactly like him. June leaned her elbows on the counter. He told me to remind you that honor isn't about revenge. It's about setting things right. The lighter was heavy in my palm. The metal smelled faintly of something like salt, a ghost of the sea that had kept his truth longer than I could bear. If he left this for me, I said, he left more than a sentence. June held my gaze for a long moment, then bent and brought up a small steel locker, the kind used for cash drops, polished padlock catching the light. He told me not to open it, she said. Said the key would come with the right person. I turned the Zippo over because the habit of problem-solving never really leaves you, and there it was, a tiny notch at the base, almost invisible. I twisted gently, and a hidden key slid into my palm like an answer. He thought of everything, June murmured. The lock clicked open, metal on metal, loud in the quiet. Inside, a folded photocopy of a Navy incident report, half the lines blacked out under government ink. A small photograph, Dad in uniform, arm around a younger officer with bright, ambitious eyes, and another handwritten note. On the back of the photo, USS Fulton, March 2008. The officer beside him was identified as Lieutenant C. Commander Ethan Cole. I knew that name. He'd spoken at a veterans event 2 years ago, a polished defense consultant selling leadership and accountability. I shook his hand. He looked through me like I was a ghost. I read the visible slices on the photocopy. Equipment malfunction. Safety drills postponed. Hart's objection filed. Command override signed. Cole. My stomach lurched. I slid the second note free. If you're reading this, the sea kept my truth longer than I could. Don't let silence win, Eve. Tell the truth, no matter what it costs. I stared until the letters blurred. The cafe's warmth felt suddenly heavy, like weather gathering in my chest. 6 sailors had died in that incident. The official story called it unavoidable, but this wasn't weather. This was a choice. June's hand came to rest lightly on the locker. He carried a burden he couldn't shake, she said. I think he hoped you'd finish what he started, but for the right reasons. Which are? I asked, though I already knew the shape of her answer. Not revenge, she said softly. Truth. I slipped the photocopy and photo into my bag, the lighter into my pocket, and tried to swallow the heat rising behind my eyes. Under the anger, there was clarity, the kind the Corps calls target lock, and a thread of fear I refused to name. As I stood to go, June called after me. You'll be back. How can you be so sure? I asked. She smiled a small, knowing smile. Because you're not done yet, and neither is the person who kept these pages from going dark. I turned at the door. What person? June didn't answer. She only glanced toward the photo where, in the blurred corner beyond my father and Cole, a third figure's sleeve cut into the frame like a secret that hadn't decided what it wanted to be. Outside, the sun had dropped to amber. I slid the Zippo into my fist and felt the notch where the key had been, a hollow now, a reminder that once you open something, you can't pretend it's closed. On the drive home, every stoplight looked like a question. Tell the truth, no matter what it costs. I whispered it until the words grew teeth. Back in the garage, the trunk still lay open, the metal steady under the bulb's thin halo. I set the receipt on top, smoothed its torn edge with my thumb, and pictured my father's hands doing the same. Start over means tell the truth. Maybe it meant tell mine too, the part that wanted to burn every lie down to ash and the part that knew flame doesn't build anything. I clicked the Zippo open and shut without striking it, listening to the clean metal syllable of a life about to change. I didn't sleep that night. The lighter sat on my nightstand, its metal glinting every time a car passed outside, and the note lay unfolded on my dresser so I could read it every time I turned over. Start over means tell the truth. I whispered it into the dark, half like a mantra, half like a dare. By morning, I knew I'd go back to June's cafe. Not out of nostalgia, out of stubbornness. I needed proof, not poetry. The second cup looked different in daylight. Sunlight revealed the tiny scratches on the tables, the faded menu chalk, the layer of dust above the window blinds. June was already behind the counter arranging pastries. She looked up without surprise. "Good morning, Major Calder," she said. The rank hit me like a forgotten title. "How did you—" "He told me you'd make rank one day," she said. He was proud of that. I swallowed hard, my mind spinning. "You knew my father's rank? His unit?" "I knew enough." She gestured toward the same stool as yesterday. "Sit. I made you something stronger than coffee." When she set the mug down, I noticed her hands, steady, precise, but a faint tremor lived just beneath the surface. "Tell me how you met him," I said. June took a slow breath. "He came in near closing time wearing civilian clothes but walking like an officer, ordered black coffee, nothing else. For a long time he just sat there, looking out the window. When he finally spoke, he said he'd made a mistake, letting silence do the talking in his family. He wanted to fix it, but didn't know how." Her voice softened. "He left for his final deployment the next morning. He knew the risk. Said if anything happened to him, maybe I could help his daughter find her way back." She reached below the counter again and lifted a small steel locker, the same one from yesterday now empty. "He left this with me," she said. "Said there'd come a time when the truth needed a new witness." I nodded, gripping the lighter in my pocket until the engraving pressed into my palm. "You think he meant me?" "I know he did, but you won't find your answers here." "Then where?" She hesitated, then said, "There's a man who served with him, Chief Miller, retired. He comes here sometimes, lives near the VA hospital downtown. If anyone knows what really happened on the Fulton, it's him." I wrote the name down. Her eyes followed the motion of my pen like she was memorizing something about me too. As I stood to leave, she added quietly, "Whatever you find, remember, honor isn't about revenge." "Yeah," I said, "you told me, but I wasn't sure which side of the line I was standing on." The VA district smelled like burnt coffee and old paper, a blend of bureaucracy and hope. Inside the community room, a sign read Veterans Breakfast, Tuesdays 7 a.m., the smell of pancakes mixed with aftershave. Men in faded baseball caps, Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, sat trading stories and voices that carried the hum of ships and deserts. Chief Miller was easy to spot, broad shoulders, weathered face, hands that looked built to grip rope or wrench steel. "Chief Miller?" I asked. He looked up from his plate. "You Hart's girl?" The question stopped me. I was. He studied me for a long beat before nodding. "He was my CO. Best damn officer I ever had." His voice roughened. "They said he died a hero." Then his eyes narrowed. "But that's not the story you heard, is it?" I hesitated. "They said it was an accident. Equipment malfunctioned. My uncle said Dad might have disobeyed orders." Miller gave a short, humorless laugh. "Thomas Hart panic? Not a chance. He filed 3 reports before that deployment. Said the new maintenance schedule was a disaster waiting to happen. Cole overrode him. Said we'd fix it next port." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Then came the storm. We lost pressure in the lower deck. Hart stayed down there until the last kid made it out. When they found the log later, the signature page for the override was gone." "Gone?" "Vanished. Accidents don't delete signatures," he said. "Men like Cole don't like blemishes on their records." My pulse thudded in my ears. "Did you ever tell anyone?" "Told the inquiry board," he said. "They told me my memory was foggy. Then they shipped me out early for medical review. That's Navy talk for shut up and retire." I swallowed. "Would you talk again if this went public?" He eyed me carefully. "You still wear the uniform?" "Not anymore." "But you remember what it means?" "I do." He nodded slowly. Then yeah, I'd talk. But tread careful, Major. Cole's got friends in high places. You dig too deep, you'll find your name on a list. I thanked him, gave him my number, and walked out into the blinding Arizona sun. The heat felt like pressure on my chest. For the first time, I wondered if the flag folded over my father's coffin had been folded over a lie. That night, I spread everything across my kitchen table: the Zippo, the photocopy, the photo, Miller's name scrawled on a napkin. My laptop glowed like a small interrogation lamp. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request. Incident report, USS Fulton, March 2008. Estimated response, 8 to 12 weeks. Bureaucracy's way of saying, we hope you give up before we do. I poured whiskey over ice and stared at the fan blades spinning above me. Don't let silence win, his note had said. But patience was a kind of silence too, and I'd never been good at that. 3 days later, June called. You've been busy, she said when I answered. How do you know? You've got that sound in your voice, the kind people get when the truth's close enough to taste. I filed the report, I said. Now I wait. Then don't just wait, she said. Listen. To what? To the people who were there. That night I went back to the Veterans Hall. Some of the men were still there, swapping stories over burnt coffee. I told them who I was, what I was doing. Most were polite but wary, until one man, a radar technician named Blake, cleared his throat. Your dad kept the ship steady through that storm, he said. We were supposed to be in lockdown, but he stayed topside, said we couldn't afford another systems failure. He saved 3 of us before the deck went dark. He looked down, voice breaking. After it happened, Cole came through the quarters, told everyone to stick to the official version, said if we cared about the Navy's reputation, we'd stay quiet. Did anyone record that? I asked. No, Blake said, but I remember every word. When I left, the desert air felt electric. Someone didn't want this story touched. Someone else wanted me to keep going. I didn't know which scared me more. 2 weeks passed. No response from the FOIA office. Then one afternoon, as I left work, I saw an envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. No return address. Inside, photocopied pages from the Fulton's maintenance log. One line circled in red pen. Drill postponed by XO Cole due to schedule conflict. CMDR. Heart objection removed from final report. Below it, a handwritten note. He wasn't wrong. Some of us still remember. I looked around the parking lot. Nothing but heat haze and moving traffic. Someone was feeding me pieces of the puzzle, but why? At home, I spread the new pages beside the old ones. The lighter sat on top, its metal catching the lamplight. Tell the truth, no matter what it costs. It sounded noble in ink. In practice, it felt like a loaded weapon. That night, I opened my laptop again. The FOIA response had finally arrived. Half the pages blacked out, entire paragraphs swallowed by thick government ink. But one line slipped through. An internal email time-stamped 24 hours before the incident. Maintenance deferment, signed and approved by XOE Cole. There it was. Proof he'd postponed the drills. Proof my father had been right. Anger rose like static under my skin. Cole had built a career on that silence, selling speeches about leadership while my father's record still whispered reckless. I stared at the computer screen until the light blurred. Then I picked up the phone and called Cole's office. Mr. Cole's schedule is full, his receptionist said in a syrupy voice. Tell him Major Carol Calder called, I said. Daughter of Commander Thomas Hart, USS Fulton. A long pause, then softer. 1 moment. When she returned, her tone was different. Flat, careful. Mr. Cole remembers your father. He asks that any further contact go through his attorney. Click. I sat in silence, the dial tone droning like a pulse. That was as good as a confession. That evening, I went back to the second cup. June didn't ask why. She just poured a cup before I spoke. I got the documents, I said. Half of them look like they were redacted by a toddler with a marker, but there's enough to prove Cole postponed the drills. June listened quietly, polishing a cup. What do you plan to do? I'm going to bring this to light, publicly. Maybe the press, maybe a hearing. I don't care how much noise it makes. June leaned on the counter, her eyes steady. And what do you want to happen when it's out there? I want him to lose everything he built on my father's grave. She studied me for a long beat. That sounds like revenge, not truth. Maybe they're the same thing this time. No, she said gently. Revenge destroys. Truth restores. Her words stung because they echoed something I'd once heard from my father. You can fight to win, or you can fight to make it right. Never confuse the two. I left the cafe with the Zippo in my pocket, my father's voice in my head, and the taste of cold coffee in my mouth like a dare. If Cole thought he could bury the truth, he hadn't met his opponent yet. And I hadn't even struck the flame. The night before I confronted Ethan Cole, I stood at the kitchen counter, polishing the brass buttons on my dress blues. Each one caught the lamplight and flashed like a heartbeat. I hadn't worn the uniform since my discharge. It fit tighter now, but I didn't care. It wasn't about ceremony. It was about proof that I still carried the same spine my father taught me to stand with. The anonymous note on my fridge read, "He's speaking at Rotary Hall. Thursday, 1900 hours. Bring the truth with you." The handwriting was printed in hard block letters, no signature. Whoever sent it wanted this to happen. Maybe June was right. Someone else had kept the story alive, waiting for me to pick up the signal. Thursday came like a storm cloud that refused to move. The Rotary Hall's parking lot gleamed under harsh sodium lights. Inside, the air smelled of aftershave, cheap coffee, and expensive lies. Rows of folding chairs filled with veterans, donors, and retired officers. A banner at the front read, "Leadership and Integrity in Service." I almost laughed. Cole stood near the podium, shaking hands, flashing his politician's smile. The same man from the veterans event years ago, taller in posture than in conscience. When he saw me, his expression faltered for just a second. Then he recovered, that smirk curling like armor. "Major Calder," he said, as if greeting an old colleague. "I wasn't expecting you." "I didn't come for the coffee," I replied. His lawyer, gray suit, cold eyes, stepped forward. "If you have a matter to discuss, Major, this isn't the place." "Oh, I think it is." I pulled the folder from my bag and slid the maintenance log across the podium. "Recognize your signature?" Cole's jaw tensed. "I don't know what this is." "It's your authorization to cancel safety drills on the Fulton, the drills that could have saved 6 men, including my father." A low murmur rippled through the room. The lawyer reached for the papers, but I kept my hand on them. "Those were decisions made under operational pressure," Cole said, voice tightening. "You can't possibly understand the weight of command responsibility." "Maybe not," I said, "but I understand accountability." He tried to keep his tone calm, but his eyes betrayed the tremor. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "Neither did my father," I said softly. "He trusted the system. Look where it got him." The lawyer hissed, "You're making a scene." "That's the idea," I said. The silence that followed was thick and dangerous. Cole's lips twitched like he wanted to fire back, but realized too many eyes were watching. I gathered the papers, turned, and walked out before anyone could stop me. Outside, the night air hit like a punch. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from release. For 14 years, the truth had been locked in a box. Tonight, I'd cracked it open. Still, as I sat in my car, staring at the empty stage through the window, I felt the cold edge of uncertainty. Truth wasn't enough to end him. I needed witnesses. By dawn, the story had leaked. Someone had filmed part of the confrontation on their phone. A blog headline popped up within hours. "Retired Navy consultant confronted by fallen commander's daughter." My inbox filled with messages, some supportive, some calling me a disgrace. June texted me only 4 words. "The water's moving now." 3 days later, I got a call from a local veterans advocacy group. They were hosting an open forum at the church hall downtown. Veterans, families, and public officials invited. They wanted me there. They wanted him there, too. I didn't hesitate. When I walked into the hall that evening, the air smelled of coffee, disinfectant, and nervous energy. Flags lined the walls. At the back, June poured coffee into paper cups, calm as ever. She caught my eye, nodded once. "Keep your voice steady," she whispered as I passed. "You're not here to shout. You're here to stand." At the front sat Ethan Cole, flanked by his lawyer, both stone-faced. My Uncle Ray stood in the back row, arms crossed, jaw tight. He hadn't spoken to me since our last fight, but he was here. Maybe that meant something. When I reached the podium, the murmurs died down. My hands trembled behind the notes, but my voice didn't. "Thank you for coming," I began. "My name is Major Carol Calder, U.S. Marine Corps, retired. My father was Commander Thomas Hart of the U.S. Navy. 15 years ago, he and 6 sailors died aboard the USS Fulton during what was called a systems failure. But new evidence shows it wasn't the sea that failed them. It was leadership. I lifted the document. These logs, uncovered from the Fulton's maintenance records, confirm that required safety drills were postponed by then XO Ethan Cole. My father objected. His objection was removed from the record. Cole's lawyer started to rise, but I raised a hand. You'll have your turn. I've waited long enough for mine. The room stilled. The veterans leaned forward, caps in their laps, faces lined with memory. My father died being called reckless, I continued. I believed it. I carried that shame for years. But silence can bury truth deeper than any ocean. Chief Miller stood from the third row. She's telling it straight, he said. Hart warned Cole before the storm. Blake's voice followed. He stayed topside to keep the ship steady, save 3 of us. The murmur turned into a wave. Cole's lawyer whispered urgently, but Cole raised a hand. For the first time, he looked human, cornered, weary. You want the truth? Cole said. Fine. The drills were delayed. The equipment was under repair. Commander Hart disagreed, and I made the call. I was XO. It was my decision. Your wrong decision, I said quietly. He hesitated, then nodded once. Yes, it was. A stunned silence filled the hall. Even the coffee urns stopped gurgling. Cole's voice dropped lower. I told myself it was a scheduling issue, that we'd make up the time later. But I knew the storm was coming. I knew Hart was right. When the alarms went off that night, he stayed on deck while I was below, checking logs that wouldn't matter in 10 minutes. He did what I should have done. The lawyer hissed, Ethan, don't! But Cole ignored him. You want revenge, Major? You've got it. You've stripped away the last lie I told myself. I shook my head. No, sir, I don't want revenge. I want my father's name back. Cole blinked, confused. And then what? Then you make it right. You start by telling the Navy what you just told us. He looked around the room, at the veterans, the widows, the folded flags. Finally, he nodded. I'll issue a statement, publicly. I owe him that much. The tension in my chest loosened. Applause didn't come right away. It started as a few quiet claps, then grew, uneven but sincere. For the first time, I allowed myself to breathe. Uncle Ray stepped forward, eyes wet. Carol, he said, his voice cracking. I should have believed you. I was scared of losing what little peace we had left. I repeated what people said about your dad because it was easier than facing the truth. I reached out, took his hand. We all do what's easy sometimes. He squeezed my fingers. I'm proud of you. I didn't realize how much I'd needed to hear that until my throat closed around it. Afterward, people lingered, murmuring thanks, leaving coins in the donation jar for the hall. June brewed one last pot of coffee, her eyes soft when they met mine. You didn't destroy him, she said. I didn't have to, I replied. He destroyed himself. June nodded slowly. That's what truth does when it finally finds daylight. I stood in that hall for a long time after everyone left. The clatter of folding chairs, the creak of old wood, the hum of fluorescent lights. Justice, I realized, didn't always sound like a gavel. Sometimes it sounded like a man finally telling the truth. When I stepped outside, the evening sky was bruised purple over the church steeple. I pulled out my father's Zippo, flicked it open, and whispered, We did it, Dad. The flame flickered once, steady and golden. But even as it burned, I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the part where silence stopped. The world didn't change overnight, but it shifted, quietly. A week after the forum, the Navy issued an official addendum to the USS Fulton inquiry. The document was short, one paragraph buried in a government archive, but its final line was enough. Commander Thomas Hart, service with honor. When I read it, I didn't cry. I just sat at my kitchen table, staring at the screen until the words stopped moving. 14 years of shame, doubt, and whispered accusations had finally been folded shut. My father's name was clean again. A few days later, they held a small ceremony at the community center. No cameras, no headlines, just a flag on a table and the people who had carried his story through the dark. Chief Miller, Blake, June, even Cole. He looked older, smaller somehow, like a man who'd been living in fluorescent light for too long. When our eyes met, he gave a faint nod. Not a plea, not an apology, something simpler, recognition. After the ceremony ended, he approached me. Major Calder, he said, his voice gravel and fatigue. Cole, I've resigned from the contractor board. I'm setting up a safety scholarship in your father's name for naval cadets who file the reports others ignore. I studied him, waiting for the slick defense executive I'd first met to reappear. He didn't. There was no performance left. Just a man stripped down to what was left of his conscience. That's a start, I said. He nodded. It's the least I can do. Then he turned and walked out, leaving behind the faint smell of aftershave and old guilt. A week later, I drove to my mother's house, a small ranch-style home on the outskirts of Tempe, still painted the same pale yellow as when I was a kid. The porch light flickered, same as always. When she opened the door, her face looked softer, gentler somehow. I saw the news, she said quietly. They finally corrected it. Inside, the air smelled of lavender polish and dust, the scent of years that hadn't moved on. On the dining table sat a neat stack of envelopes tied with navy blue ribbon. I found these after your father's memorial, Mom said, sitting down. I never had the heart to read them. Maybe it's time. The ribbon fell away easily. Most letters were official, duty logs, commendations, but near the bottom was one envelope marked Eve. My breath caught. His handwriting, steady even after all these years. I opened it carefully. Eve, if you ever find this, it means I didn't make it home. You've always had more courage than I taught you to have. You follow orders, but you think for yourself. That's rare. If there's one lesson I left unfinished, it's this. Honor isn't the absence of mistakes. It's what you do after them. If you ever feel lost, start over with the truth. I raised you to choose courage over comfort. I'm proud of you, no matter what comes next. Dad. The words blurred as I read them. I folded the letter gently and held it to my chest. He knew, I whispered, even back then. Mom smiled through tears. He always knew you'd find your way back. For a moment, the house felt warmer than it had in years. Life after vindication didn't come with fireworks. It came with small repairs. June called a week later. Cole reached out, she said, offered to fund a monthly meetup for veterans and families, a space to share records, stories, help with VA claims. We're calling it the Heart Program. I laughed softly. He's serious? Truth has to keep working, she said. Otherwise it goes stale. When I arrived at the second cup that Friday, the tables were pushed together to form a long rectangle. Veterans, spouses, even a few teenagers filled the seats. The air buzzed with nervous energy and coffee steam. June moved like a conductor among them, refilling cups, matching names to stories. Uncle Ray showed up halfway through, hat in his hands, eyes cautious. Heard about this meeting, he said. Thought maybe I could help. I know a thing or two about paperwork. June grinned. We always need someone who can wrestle bureaucracy. Ray gave her a sheepish look, then turned to me. Your father would have liked this. He never cared for speeches, just fixing what's broken. I smiled. Guess we're finally doing that. He nodded, pride flickering behind the guilt that had haunted him. Better late than never. Over the next few months, the cafe changed shape. Photos of veterans and their families began covering the walls, each framed with a short, handwritten caption. Starting over. Finding peace. Telling the truth. June called it Second Chances Night. Once a month, people came not just for coffee, but for the company of others who'd been silenced. Miller told war stories like parables. Blake helped new vets fill out benefit forms. Mom baked cookies for every session, pretending not to listen to the speeches that made her eyes water. And Ray became the unofficial coordinator, clipboard in hand, barking instructions like a man who just remembered leadership was still in his bones. Cole never attended. But every month, a small, unmarked envelope arrived in the mail addressed to Heart Program Fund. Inside, a cashier's check and a note with 2 words, Keep Building. June framed the first note behind the counter. One night, after the meeting emptied and the lights dimmed, June poured 2 cups and slid one toward me. You look like someone still listening for footsteps, she said. I keep waiting for it to feel finished, I admitted. But it doesn't. Truth doesn't end things, she said. It just starts them clean. I stared into the coffee, the ripples catching the reflection of the neon sign in the window. You ever wonder who sent those anonymous notes? The one that told me where Cole would be? June's lips curved. Some stories don't need every thread pulled. Maybe the right people wanted the truth to speak for itself. I smiled faintly. Or maybe you just like good mystery. She shrugged. Maybe. Outside, the desert rain began to fall. Soft, steady, rare. The smell of wet pavement drifted in through the open door. I reached into my pocket, flicked the Zippo once. The flame caught and danced against the glass, reflecting a dozen tiny versions of itself in the window. He'd have liked this place, I said. June nodded. He'd have liked what you did with his silence. For the first time in years, I felt the weight in my chest ease. The story wasn't over, but it was no longer heavy. Truth, I realized, wasn't a weapon. It was a bridge. And we'd finally learned how to cross it. Stop. 6 months later, the second cup was unrecognizable from the quiet cafe I'd first walked into. The once empty walls now held framed photos of veterans and their families, each one accompanied by a handwritten note. Starting over, finding peace, telling the truth. The smell of roasted beans and old stories lingered in the air. Every first Friday, the place filled with people who had once sworn they'd run out of words. Now they came to share them. We called it Second Chances Night, though June said she preferred to think of it as community therapy in disguise. She still wore that same worn apron, still kept her sleeves rolled high, and still moved through the crowd with a grace that didn't need acknowledgement. From my usual table by the window, I could see everyone: the young Marine trying to explain PTSD paperwork to a Vietnam vet, the widow reading a letter from her husband aloud, the teenager transcribing it quietly on her laptop for the local newsletter. Every corner of the cafe hummed with something alive, fragile, and beautiful. When I looked at it all, I thought, this is what truth looks like when it heals instead of burns. After the Navy amended my father's record, I started writing again. Not reports, not exposés, stories. The first one I published was called Restoring Honor. It wasn't about revenge or corruption. It was about the space between silence and forgiveness, the distance between who we lose and who we become. The piece went viral in the way small miracles do. Not explosive, not loud, just steady, spreading from inbox to inbox. Within weeks, I started receiving letters, real ones, handwritten envelopes from strangers who wanted to talk about their own ghosts. A retired pilot wrote, "Your story gave me permission to stop calling my failure an accident." A widow from Maine said, "Justice doesn't mean punishment, it means breathing again." And one note came from Cole's assistant, unsigned but typed. "He keeps a copy of your article on his desk. It's folded, but it's there." June framed that message beside the espresso machine. Uncle Ray became the heart of the Heart program. Clipboard in hand, glasses on a chain, he showed up early every week to help veterans navigate claims, appeals, and impossible paperwork. The man who once told me to leave the past buried was now the loudest advocate for digging it up properly. Mom joined him sometimes. She brought cookies and stories, both half-baked in the same loving way. She still couldn't talk about Dad for long, but when she did, she smiled instead of flinched. That was progress. Cole never came in person, but every month another envelope arrived. Same block lettering, same simple message: keep building. June never said it aloud, but I caught her glancing at those envelopes like someone who understood the language of redemption. One evening, long after the crowd had left, June poured 2 cups and joined me at my table. The sun was melting behind the city skyline, and the air outside smelled faintly of rain and asphalt. "So," she said, "what's next for Major Calder?" "Just Carol now," I corrected, smiling. "All right, just Carol. What's next?" I swirled my coffee. "I'm expanding the column, turning it into a series. I'm calling it Start Over, stories of people who rebuild after losing everything. Veterans, civilians, anyone who finds their way back." June grinned, eyes glinting behind her glasses. "Sounds like the right kind of work." "It feels that way," I said quietly. "I think I finally understand what Dad meant. Starting over isn't about forgetting the past, it's about making peace with it." June nodded, and teaching others to do the same. The cafe's neon sign flickered against the glass, casting the words, "The Second Cup," across her face in glowing red letters. For a moment, she looked like a guardian at the doorway between memory and healing. Later that week, I drove out to the base cemetery. The Arizona sun was brutal, bleaching the grass to pale gold. My father's headstone was simple, the kind he'd have chosen for himself: Commander Thomas Hart, U.S. Navy, service with honor. I knelt and brushed the dust from the carved letters. "I got the job, Dad," I whispered. "They're calling it the Start Over series. You're the first story." The wind answered with a gentle ripple through the flags. I reached into my bag and pulled out the same faded receipt that had started it all. The ink was almost gone, but I could still read the words: "Come back when you're ready to start over." I smiled. I guess I finally was I tucked the receipt beneath a small stone at the base of his marker, the way Marines leave coins to say, "I was here." As I stood, I felt the familiar weight of the Zippo in my pocket. I flicked it open and watched the flame dance in the dry breeze. You were right, I said softly. Starting over doesn't mean beginning again. It means continuing, honestly. Then I closed the lighter and let the flame die on its own. That evening, back at the second cup, the place was alive again. Voices mingled with laughter and the hiss of steaming milk. I gave my usual short talk: how to request old service records, how to file appeals, how to keep going when the system forgets your name. When I finished, I looked out at the crowd. Some faces were familiar, some brand new. If anyone here thinks it's too late to make things right, I said, you're wrong. The truth doesn't expire. It just waits for us to be brave enough to find it. A quiet ripple went through the room. Nods, smiles, even a few tears. Afterward, a young woman in an Army Reserve jacket approached me. She couldn't have been older than 25. She held out a folded piece of paper. I found this in my dad's things, she said. It just says, meet me at the second cup. I thought maybe it was a coincidence, until I heard your story online. I smiled. It's never a coincidence, I told her. Sometimes the people we lose still know where to send us. She laughed softly, then hugged me. And for the first time, I felt something shift inside me. Not closure, not triumph. Something quieter. A circle closing, another opening right behind it. When the crowd thinned out, I sat alone at my table, sipping the last of my coffee. June wiped down counters, humming a Navy hymn I half recognized. Outside, dusk had fallen. The neon sign reflected off the window in pale pink light. I pulled out the Zippo again, flicked it open, and watched the flame catch for a moment before closing it. That tiny flash of light had become my reminder that nothing truly ends. It just changes form. Then I leaned towards the small mic we use for recording the podcast episodes and spoke softly. Sometimes starting over isn't a choice. It's a calling. It's the universe whispering, you're not finished yet. If this story found you tonight, maybe it's because you needed to hear that. So tell me, what truth have you been avoiding? What story needs to be told before you can start again? I smiled, imagining my father listening somewhere beyond the static. Until next time, I said quietly, keep your faith, keep your honor, and never stop telling the truth. The cafe bell rang as the last customer left. The lights dimmed. The Zippo's reflection flashed once on the window before I tucked it back into my pocket. Starting over, I realized, was never about finding closure. It was about keeping the story alive.